Well, hello there, everyone. Sorry about the little delay. I think we were a minute or two late, but it's not a big deal because I like to run a nice, easygoing conversation. My name is Matt Yancic, and I'm the founder and I'm the head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Ledger Domain. And tonight on Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces, I'm super excited to have none other than Jeff Easley, the legendary Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy artist, here with us tonight. To me, Jeff Easley's work is Dungeons and Dragons. So I was just telling Jeff just before the program that the first Dungeons and Dragons item that I ever sort of squirreled away my money for and saved up for was the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I remember buying in a hobby shop outside of Hartford when I was growing up. And that cover really made an impression on me. So Jeff has worked at TSR in the past and Wizards of the Coast for, I think, a couple of decades. And in addition, he's been doing tons of freelance work. He's done work for Dragonlance, and he's done work on Magic cards. And from what I have just sort of recently learned, he's also been working on guitars, which I think is pretty cool. So, Jeff, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing tonight? Yeah, seems I think you got everything squared away. No problem. I just sort of wanted to ask you. Now I know who you are, and I could just sort of go on and on about you. But if I were to ask you to sort of describe to someone that doesn't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ah, I see. And so, can you tell me a little bit about how? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm actually getting a notice here. It says that someone is saying that we can't hear Jeff at this point. I'm a little worried about that. Let me just double check and make sure that a few of the settings are a-okay, because I would hate to think that. So I'm going to walk my cursor over here, switch something, and once I do that, Jeff, can you please say a few more words there just to sort of test things out? Okay, cool. I hear you okay. I'm hoping that we can hear you there in out there in YouTube land. Jared, how is that now? Can you hear Jeff? All right. Well, I'm hoping we're going to be okay. So I think we're all right. So we'll give it another shot. I'm sorry about that. So at any rate, Jeff, could you maybe tell us one more time who you are and what you do? And that was so wonderful. And I know you can't. It's like an ice sculpture. Once you've done it and it melts away, it's gone. But if you could attempt to capture some of the magic of what you just said. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Ah, okay, cool. Thanks. Thanks very much, Jeff. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but I'm still getting the message that we can only hear We can only hear me, and I don't want to hear me. I want to hear Jeff. Everybody wants to hear Jeff. Let me try this again. Jared, I just want to say thanks very much for watching out there. I just want to make sure. I appreciate you looking out for us and letting us know. Let me see if there's something I'm going to make a little switch here and just okay, I'm so sorry, Jeff. If you could just try it one more time. I'm really sorry. This is really embarrassing and I feel bad. I appreciate your time. But if you could maybe give us one more test with that.
Okay, we'll say I'm Jeff Easley. I
Mm-hmm.
started working in 1982 at TSR doing Dungeons and Dragons and role playing game art, and worked there for a little over 20 years until about 2003. And after that, I started freelancing and have done that basically since ever since. So that's what I've been doing for that length of time.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Jeff. So let's see. I see my levels here. They all look fine. Let's see what Jared says out there in YouTube land. Oh, great. Jared just says he can hear you. Ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen, I want to apologize for that. I'm not sure what was going on, but I'm not at my usual setup. And I also want to, of course, apologize to Jeff for that. I'm sorry. He's been very good about coming on out of nowhere and doing this, but I'm glad we can hear you now. So at any rate, Jeff, can you tell us a little bit? I know that because you've told me now 4 times that you're a fantasy artist for D&D that worked for TSR, and you told the group out there once. Can you tell me a little bit about when did you first discover maybe your love for, well, tell me about your discovery of maybe your love for painting and drawing and illustrating. When did that happen?
well, I discovered that inclination at a very early age. I mean, I have old sketchbooks that my mom kept, from when I was 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, and oddly enough, even those old books had kind of leaned heavily toward fantasy type subject matter. I love monsters and certainly Frankenstein and uh, dinosaurs and gorillas and that sort
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Any of the old monsters like that. So my interest in fantasy started at a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
I showed some ability at it, so my parents encouraged me a great deal, and I think at that age that's your main feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
That's your reward for continuing to practice and improve. So I kept at it, and here I am.
So unlike a lot of like when I grew up, my parents were a little bit reluctant to sort of let me get into the monsterish kind of stuff. But would you say maybe your parents were pretty encouraging about that and were okay with you kind of drawing monsters or and whatnot?
Well, now that you mention it, it was actually a little bit of a. I think they had their qualms about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much that I drew, but really got into the monster magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland and so
Yes.
forth. And I just loved that stuff. And I did not have any way to access that sort of thing, but I had a cousin who lived near us in a larger city,
Mm-hmm.
and he was able to get these magazines. So we would go visit, and I would borrow a stack from him. And they kind of reluctantly, you know, uh, went along with it. But I had very little access to it on my own as far as going out and buying this sort of thing. So and yeah, early on they started showing them old movies on TV, and they didn't have any problems with me watching the movies and so
Right.
forth. So
Right.
uh, they kind of reluctantly went along with it. I guess they didn't clamp down on me too badly.
No, I think that's great. Like my parents were pretty. I think my parents hesitated a little bit. Like, obviously, if I'm interviewing Jeff Easley, it probably means that I have a bit of a background being interested in monsters and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. My parents were a little reluctant about it, but it sounds a little bit like Maybe yours were as well, but you managed to sort of, like a lot of young boys, kind of find the material that you were really attracted to. And it's interesting that you mentioned Famous Monsters of Filmland. That was what a great magazine that was. Were you also like into? You mentioned Frankenstein. Were you into? I'd read that you were into like the model kits and things like that. Were you building?
Oh yeah, those were. I was just totally fascinated with those. I was probably 8 or 9 years old when those came out, and
Mhm.
that first Frankenstein kit was my most anticipated Christmas gift of my childhood. I just 98 cents, of heaven. What can you ask for? So yeah, I just every time one of those came out, I snapped it up, and I think I had about all of them.
Oh, really? Those were I love those. Like I think I had like I definitely had a Frankenstein. I had a creature from the black or yeah, creature from the Black Lagoon and a few
Oh yeah.
others. Like do you still do model kits at all or is that something you've kind of retired to your childhood?
No, they kind of reissued a lot of them, a few years ago when I actually bought them, thinking, well, I'll put them together someday, but I haven't done that. But I just, I did, I have a closet full of them now, but I don't know if I'm going to ever get around to putting them together.
But I think that's to be honest, as also a fellow model collector. Like I think the truth is, I have more models than I will ever complete, and I have actually some models that I've been working on for like 10 years now, and I'm just incrementally kind of. So I can kind of identify with that. Do you think? Let me ask you then. Who were these? As far as when you were a child and your influences go, do you think that these kind of monsters and cinema and things like that, the model kits, were those an influence on you, or was there someone that was kind of steering you in that direction, or maybe an actor in film like that, like I don't know, that like playing scary characters in film that was maybe an influence on you as a kid?
I don't know how much of an influence they had. I mean, through Famous Monsters, I was introduced to all the old, Karloff and Lugosi, all the old guys from
Mm-hmm.
the 30s and 40s and so forth. But as far as an artistic influence, well, around that time, well, Warren Publications started putting out Creepy and Eerie in
Mm-hmm.
Vampirella magazine.
Mm.
And that was my first introduction to Frank Frazetta's artwork, the covers that he did, early covers for Creepy magazine in particular, were my first introduction to him. So that was certainly an influence. I mean, he's, continues to this day to probably be my favorite artist, so that was definitely an influence there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at Frazetta's work and I look at your work, and I would say that they're very obviously very different. Like your use of color and the way that you and I apologize, I'm not an artist, so I don't know the proper maybe terminology to use, but I can kind of see a little bit of his DNA maybe in your works, but I can also see some kind of big differences like in your approaches. But I was that kind of leads me into this then. So did you sort of discover? Were you doing the model kits first, and then you discovered I want to draw and paint, or were you drawing and painting, and so you sought out the model kits, or kind of which came first?
Oh, as I said, I was probably started drawing when I was 4 or 5 years old. I mean, preschool, and so forth. Even drawing monsters and that sort of thing. So I was actually doing artwork and stuff before the models came along. But they all fed into the same fit into the same loop. So that was you know in the movies and so forth that started up, showing them on TV and so forth. It all fit into the same interest.
Oh, cool. And so then, when was it that you sort of started thinking seriously, like, because I do know that you did go to art school, and so you do have that sort of formal training as far as schooling goes. But when was it that you sort of started thinking, well, this isn't just say a hobby. This is something that I can turn into, my career or my profession. Was there any kind of spark for that, or did it just kind of happen?
Well, as I mentioned, I started at an early age and got some good feedback and showed some aptitude, I guess, in art. So growing up, growing up, I was kind of the class artist and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, as I got older, I figured if I was going to college for anything, it would be for artwork. So and so when it came time to go in that direction, that was kind of a foregone conclusion, I guess.
Mm. What was it like being in school? Like, and were you the guy that was doing? Was your first art mostly fantasy art? Were you focusing in on other things, or how was getting through school? I'm trying to. I guess here's what I'm thinking. When I was in high school, I used to do a lot of drawing, and I would draw monsters, and I would draw girls, and I would draw like scary like things. And my teachers used to look at me and say, "This is very nice, but someday you're gonna have to like get out of your comfort zone a little bit." Were you supported through school, or were you doing different things in school, like practicing in different ways?
Well, as far as when I went to school, I went to Murray State University in Kentucky and majored in art. And actually, by that time, having come up through high school and so forth, I had kind of decided, well, maybe the fantasy type stuff was a little bit childish or something.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of moved a little bit out of the doing the artwork, the fantasy artwork. And I kind of rediscovered it as I was about my halfway through college. I decided that, well, what am I going to do with this? And
Mm-hmm.
I literally one day at the newsstand, I picked up the current issue of Creepy magazine again. Was reintroduced to it. And this just everything just kind of cascaded on me again. So I started collecting magazines and just started doing artwork and doing artwork for fanzines, which I don't know how prevalent those are now, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
back then they were really kind of coming into their in the mid '70s. They were coming into their peak, I guess,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
people putting out their own like semi-professional magazines. And so a lot of people did like a really good job of it and used color covers and paid a little bit of money for them and so forth. So I really did kind of jumped into that little genre with both feet. And um, but as far as in college, well, even illustration, like straight illustration, was not exactly. Uh, it was like the redheaded stepchild of art. Well, they
Yeah,
didn't really consider it art, I guess. But
yeah.
once I leaned in that direction, I was off and running. I didn't really care what they thought about it.
Right.
I probably neglected my schoolwork in order to do the fanzine work and the stuff that I was doing outside of my regular classes. But I was determined to do that.
Was the fanzine work, and this is just a general curiosity, was it actually paid, or was this something that you were like, you know what, I just want to be a part of this magazine that's going out, or I just want to do this or that? Were you paid and commissioned for it, or was it just stuff you did for your own enjoyment?
Some of it, well, there were fanzines which really didn't pay, and then there were like, I guess, a division known as semi-pro zines that
Mm-hmm.
actually did pay.
Mm-hmm.
And they would charge $3.50 or so forth for a copy.
Right.
So it was pretty good money, pretty good little hit back in the day, back in the '70s. So, uh, and at the time, I got married halfway through college, and we were living in an apartment paying $40 a month rent. So it didn't take, it didn't take a lot of money to keep us going.
Right.
So, it was, you know, 15 or $20 for an illustration was, a pretty good little, addition to the cookie jar. So, uh, for the time, it was not too bad.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like it. So then, what was once you was is your wife an artist as well? Were you both at the same school for art, or were you doing kind of different things? Or
Yeah, that's where we met. She was a art major, also
Oh,
majoring in
cool.
weaving. So
Oh, wow.
we didn't overlap too much in that regard. But yeah, that was we met at school.
Oh, cool. So then once you're married and then you end up graduating a couple of years later, um, what was did you kind of leap to TSR pretty quickly, or was there a little bit of a build up to that, or was it? I know there's a little bit of a story to that, but I wasn't really sure which facts I had right and which ones were wrong. So I was hoping to hear that from you.
Well, we graduated, and in order to my goal at that point was to do paperback covers.
Mm-hmm.
And towards that end, we actually moved to Massachusetts with another couple that we knew. I figured, well, Massachusetts is closer to New York than Kentucky was, so
Yeah, a little bit.
it was just a little bit, But so yeah, we moved up there, and well, I managed to do a little bit of inking work for the Warren magazines while I was there, also. So that was interesting.
That's right. And you were also working so for Warren, and did you do a little bit of work for Marvel? Was that right? That was before TSR. Is that correct?
Just
Or
a couple of things, just like a couple. I actually did a couple of covers for them. I did a Savage Sort of Conan cover and a
that's
Bizarre
right.
Adventures cover, and
Yes.
but yeah, that was pretty early stuff. But that it didn't really amount to much. I still had my eyes on the paperbacks, But
Mm-hmm.
I was before I really got my foot in the door in that regard. I got the information that Larry Elmore, who I'd met through a mutual friend or a friend that had attended Murray, had taken a job. He was working at Fort Knox at the time, but he had
Mm-hmm.
taken a job at PSR, which
Mm-hmm.
I was really pretty much unaware of. But I had heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but I didn't really know anything about the game. But at that point, I knew Larry just well enough that I could call him and see what the story was. And he said, "Well, at that point, this is 1982.
Mm-hmm.
They're growing by leaps and bounds. They're looking
Yeah.
to increase the staff and so forth." So he encouraged me to send in some samples, which I did, and that led me to getting the job. So that was my one successful network.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's a pretty awesome. I guess if you're breaking into doing painting for RPGs, having Larry Elmore to refer you is that's nothing to sneeze at right there. So that's pretty impressive. Do you happen to remember what your submissions were in order to get the job, or is that like long since slipped your memory?
Well, I'm sure at that point my portfolio was pretty limited.
Mm-hmm.
I had done a couple of covers that had been used on Creepy Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Just they bought them out of my portfolio, so I'm sure those are probably front and center. And then I had done a handful of other paintings that I don't think that were ever actually probably were never actually printed or published anywhere. But I probably had 6 or 7 paintings. Well, I had the Savage Sort of Conan painting and so forth. So it was all I had. Everything that I showed them was fantasy oriented. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was, I guess, impressive enough for them to take me on and take a chance on me.
Yeah, well, I would say they definitely had a lot of confidence in you because I know that how long was it before because I mean I would imagine quite soon after you were doing the really famous to me and I think to an entire generation of D&D players. You were doing the covers for those orange spined hardcovers for AD&D.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how soon after you were hired at TSR did you end up doing those covers? Was it a kind of a gradual sort of progression where they're like, okay, we'll give them a little bit more stuff, or did they just see your stuff, flip out, and say, oh, you got to do our covers?
Well, I remember when I first started there, I wasn't even sure if I was even going to be doing color work.
Wow.
I thought I might, I thought I might be just doing interior, like pen and inks or something like that. So
Right.
I was, uh, I was rather kind of relieved and pleased to find out that I was actually doing module covers. I started off doing those,
Okay.
and when they decided to redo the box set and the rule books, I
Yeah.
guess they decided to divvy up the work between Larry and myself. So Larry obviously did the box covers, and I did the books, the DM guide and the player's handbook and monster manuals and stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah, it worked out pretty well.
that is what I remember because back during that time, and I have a vague memory of it, but I do still have all my stuff. And but I do remember that Larry Elmore was doing the covers for like the different colored boxes. And then I also remember though when I picked up the hardcovers, and for those of you maybe watching at home, this is actually a copy of. I apologize to you, Jeff. You can't see this, but I'm putting up the image for the Dungeon Master Guide, the one that I actually picked up when I was a kid. But I do remember um, Larry Elmore was doing, of course, the boxed stuff, but you were doing the hardcover stuff. And how quickly did they just sort of divide it up and say, okay, Larry, you're doing this, Jeff, you're doing that, go to it, or was there some sort of negotiation, or was because Larry had already been there, did he sort of have first dibs, or was it just sort of an assignment?
Yeah, I think the powers that be there got together, and I have no idea why they divvied up one to the other or whatever. But I guess they had confidence that we do a good job. So I guess that was the main thing.
And so while starting there, you're there for 20 something years. Was it a case of where, and this is going to sound silly, but I'm just wondering, do you come in at 9 o'clock and and like they're just giving you stuff to draw and paint, and then you leave at 5, or are you working from home and like they giving you assignments, or how did that work out?
Well, we did have an office that, of course, we had moved to Lake Geneva.
Mm-hmm.
So I came into the office every day. At that point, it was in an old hotel downtown in Lake Geneva. People who are very familiar with the history of TSR will recall the old hotel that a lot of people were stationed at the time.
Right.
So, yeah, I came in and we had our little desks or, tables, drafting tables set up, and Larry and I and Steve Sullivan, who did maps, were in one small hotel room. They were all like old hotel rooms. So we were in one room there by ourselves.
Oh wow. So you're in a hotel room, and this is kind of like where you're all set up and stationed, and TSR would give you an assignment, and then you just sort of go to town with that.
Yeah, pretty much. We just, and at that point, they would give us a job and we would do it, and we would take it off to be shot and give us another job, and we would take off on that. So that was the best part of the job, not having to go out and try and rustle up work. And
Yeah, they're just sort of giving you assignments because someone in the chat was actually asking like what sort of directions you were given for your work. Did they tell you, okay, we want a dragon holding on to a fighter about to sort of breathe fire on him, or did they give you a little bit of room to play with that, or did they give you text maybe from the modules and say paint what inspires you?
well, it varied. If there was like, for instance, a paperback book or a module that had a established storyline, as they all do, they would give us art suggestions, and they
Mm-hmm.
would give us maybe 3 different scenarios, because oftentimes the work was not even written by the time we
No
had to do the
kidding.
covers in advance, for the
Wow.
the catalog that
Yeah.
came out in advance.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we had to rely on the editor. Sometimes they would have to rely on the author to give them just a few scenarios, possible things that we could kind of elaborate on,
Yeah.
and so, things that were a little less cut and dried, like a player's handbook, where
Mm-hmm.
we just had to kind of do something that was indicative. I assume that I must have came up with the dungeon master opening the doors. I guess that seemed like a you know reasonable thing for a dungeon master's
To
guide.
be right. To be. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Kind of a generic kind of approach, but you know, some things were very specific. I remember one thing, probably the low point of the things I can remember was had to do like a Greek god falling on a temple and smashing it, and something that specific. I don't think I would ever come up by myself, but it was part of the module, and that's what they wanted. So,
Yeah. Well,
but
I. Oh, please.
no, it's just that's kind of the way it worked.
I was just going to correct you. You said that's the kind of generic stuff you came up with, and I honestly, I've got to say, I'm going to put a little bit more artwork up now for people to sort of take a look at. But anyone watching at home, this was what it was like in the early 80s when I would go to the store and I would be looking for stuff to buy. This is the stuff that I would find on the shelves. And I just sort of want to bring up something that someone in the chat said. So Steve, actually a buddy of mine, Steve Canaris, just said that Jeff's D&D world is my D&D world. When I envision it, it's through the lens of Jeff's art, and I really think that this is very true of Jeff's work. Just taking a look at this stuff, even if I would have to say that even if you're not a Dungeons and Dragons fan, I think there's a whole group of people out there that have seen your paintings, they've seen your drawings, they've seen the stuff that you've done, and in some way, shape, or form, they've particularly if you're into RPGs, but if you're into fantasy art, uh, I very much agree with Steve, and I would have to say that even though I love the artwork in third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, I feel like the work that you did with those other artists like Larry Elmore and the other fellows that were working really opened it up and made it sort of seem possible to make a living out of fantasy art and fantasy work. So I just think I'm in awe when I see your stuff. Did you did you have any feeling? Was there like when I picture this, I'm picturing that your time at TSR were it was pretty much the golden years of TSR. Was there any feeling like there's something kind of magical going on here, or was it just sort of we're having fun, we're doing a job?
Well, probably having fun and doing a job was probably the main thing, at that
Right.
time. It was, we were all young and wanted to, do our best and establish ourselves. And it was a lot of energy, working there. We all worked in a big room. We just had eventually a larger room than the old hotel, but the, we just had our tables kind of lined up and so forth, and we really kind of fed off one another, and picked up things from each other for sure. Like it was just like a really exciting time. It was a unique situation too. I don't maybe there's some, well, of course everything now is almost everything is done digitally, so
Yeah.
I don't know if there's even such a thing as a group of artists sitting around painting oil paintings anymore. But it was a unique situation, and I really appreciate how lucky I was to have kind of pinball my way into that situation. It was very unique.
I yeah, I would say with, just in all honesty, like to me, and I know I've said this 3 times already, but to me, and I think it's no exaggeration when Steve said this in the chat, like to me, your work is Dungeons and Dragons to me. You and Larry and a few others like Keith Parkinson and Clyde Caldwell and people like that. The work that you fellas created, when I think of real classic D&D, and I when I see the fourth and fifth edition stuff, I feel like if there had never been a Jeff Easley, there probably wouldn't be the D&D that exists now. I feel that your flavor and your styles really steered that. And I think it's a really grand, it's an amazing contribution that you made. So then you're there for about 20 years or so. What's it like working with these other fellows where you're playing off of each other? Like, is there anything kooky going on? Are you like out trying to outdo each other? Or are you just, do you hang out with each other after work's over? Or what was that like?
Oh yeah, we hung around, went to movies and stuff, and went over people's houses for dinner and that sort of thing. And we were all in our 20s at the time. It's hard to believe now, but yeah, it was just well, you kind of threw me off with all the compliments there. Let me
Oh,
first
I'm sorry.
thank you in advance for thank you in advance for myself and for the other guys too. I know they all appreciate. But I would have to say that I want to reiterate how lucky I think I am to have got into that position, because then and now there was certainly dozens, if not hundreds, and now probably thousands of people who could have stepped into my position, and at this point they would be Jeff Easley. It was just literally. I've said before, I feel like I'm the poster boy for the being in the right place at the right time. So that was I never let that drift too far from my consciousness.
Well, I think you had right. Okay, yeah, that was maybe fair to say, right place at the right time. But you also had the right stuff that was needed. I mean, if it weren't for your stuff and everyone else's stuff, I don't think 12-year-old me and a lot of other 12-year-old people that are viewers might not have picked stuff up. There's like a reason I picked up that Dungeon Master's Guide as opposed to, another game that was on the shelf. Or actually, I bought it at a hobby shop. There were model kits that I could have picked up as well, but I think it was like I want to say it was like $15 at the time, but it was like a struggle to save up that money. And then I rode my bike and all that stuff, and I went down there and I picked it up, and there was a reason for that. And I think you gave great fuel to like a lot of imaginations and to the industry that we see. I think today it's partially attributable to you and the other people that were doing the work that you did. So can you tell me a little bit about how did those 20 years change? Do you have any feeling like, was it different coming in and and then being there for about 10 years and then being there for about 20 years? Were there little changes in the way the company was set up, or maybe who you worked with, or where there was an evolution perhaps at TSR and into eventually Wizards of the Coast?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you're familiar at all with the lineup of artists at TSR, I was there for quite a progression of people who came through there. All great artists in their own right. Brom and Clyde was already there, but Rob Ruppel and just Todd Lockwood, just the whole list of people that came through there during my tenure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, a lot of people who are, again, familiar with the history of TSR know that are somewhat familiar with the changing of the guard as far as the owners and so forth, and that sort of thing. And luckily, we were kind of insulated from all the drama in that regard, being in the art department. We just kind of went up there and shut the door and painted, and
Right.
kind of kept our nose clean, and we probably wouldn't know anything, and if nobody came in and didn't tell us, we were
Right.
just kind
You would
of
just still be up there painting.
yeah, we were just at our, sitting there breathing our turpentine and having a good
Right.
time.
Are you feeling any adverse effects from all of the oil painting and turpentine over the decades, Jeff? Is everything okay, or how's the health that way?
Oh, I'm fine. You know, well, I stopped years ago using turpentine because that had gotten a bad rap. Because well, even Frank Rosetta himself supposedly had suffered from turpentine poisoning at one point
Yeah.
or another. So I switched over to this so-called odorless paint
Mm-hmm.
thinner, something which is
Mm-hmm.
not really odorless, but
Mm.
I I have not had any ill effects that I know. I mean, something's going to get you sooner or later, but so
Who
far it hasn't been
knows? Still getting
paint
work.
related.
It's working out, right? Still getting the work. How about your process then? I am an amateur. So when I was in high school, I had kind of a choice. I could either go the art route, or I could go like the writing route, and I chose writing because I didn't really think I had it as far as the artwork goes. But can you tell us a little bit about, and this may be a very general question, you can totally correct me on this, or help me understand this. Do you have a method? Like, do you get up at a certain time, do like 10 jumping jacks, and then like, take a look at the sun rise and then start painting? Or are you a night guy? Or how does your process of creation work?
Well, at this point, I I do have a backlog of things that I promised people to do, but I did kind of claw my way up until Social Security, so I got a little bit of money coming in that I don't have to
There you
earn.
go. Yeah.
But uh, well, just a few months ago, I took on a bunch of paintings from a card company in New Zealand
Mm-hmm.
that hopefully will be published pretty soon. But I probably did 14 or 15 paintings, in the course of a few months, 3 or 4 paintings at a time. But I find, the older I get, I can't really uh, sit hunched over a drawing table for 8 or 10 hours a day. So I'll do something and get work 3 or 4 hours a day on it, and then when I get it done, I'll take a few days off. And I don't take on a lot of things with heavy deadlines, so
Right.
I kind of have the like I've been kind of coasting a little bit since Christmas, to be honest with you, because I was
Mm-hmm.
having some problems with my neck, just like
Hmm.
bending over a drawing table all the time. This is
Yeah.
kind of annoying me. So
Yeah. Do you then, so you mentioned like 8 or 9 hours something a day. Is this, it's hard for me to ask this question because I'm trying to figure out exactly how to ask it. But if you're given, say, I assume a commission or an assignment, um, do you just sort of feel the inspiration and you let it flow, or does it tend to be? Do they tell you sort of specifically what they'd like you to do, and then do you say, okay, I'm going to start work at like such and such time, and I'm going to quit, and then if I don't, fully finish, I'll just get up the next day and do the same thing?
well, it depends as far as what the customer is interested in. I mean, sometimes it's very specific, and in that case, I can do what they ask. But if
Oh,
they want my feedback or a little bit more of my uh, inspiration, I can do that also. I just I'll take a shot at what they asked for. So it's usually a little bit more fun the more freedom I have. Just to kind of come up with an approach. But
mm-hmm.
they usually gives me some sort of a general direction to go, which is fine.
Do you find that there is a difference? Um, So thinking back to young Jeff Easley, who's like, reading famous monsters of filmland and doing paintings and drawings on his own, and Jeff Easley now that sometimes needs to sit down at a certain time and meet a deadline and all of that. Is there a difference between what you're, say, creating on your own for yourself and what you're creating as a commissioned work, or do you try to find the inspiration in whatever it is you paint and create?
Well, I don't often get a chance to just sit down and do something for myself. Just like I say, I usually have a backlog. If I'm going to sit down and work, I feel like I should work on something that I
Right.
promised somebody that they're waiting on. So
Right.
I have a few ideas in my head that I would like to get down on canvas or board or whatever before while I'm still able. But I just recently I have the fellow who does Larry Elmore's website
Mm-hmm.
approached me about kind of revamping my website, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I had never really done that many prints. I didn't have the inclination to do it myself because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
We have some prints now, and it's like every time I get an order in, it takes me a day to get it together and drive it to the post office and so forth. But I
Right.
think he's going to take over the job and get up a number of newer prints or prints of older stuff that people want, like the old DM cover and all that kind of sort
Mm-hmm.
of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of excited to see how that goes. That would be a bit of a new thing for me.
Yeah, I think there would definitely be. I don't want to think about it in financial terms, but I think there was definitely a market for it. I know that there's an interest for it. I wouldn't have contacted you unless I were interested in, like, hearing more about it. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that would love to, like, see something like that happen. Are you? You said there's a couple things that you wanted to do while you're still able. I was just wondering, what is something that you'd like to do with your art? I feel like it's a little bit of a shame. I hear you say that you're doing a lot of commission work, which is cool. But then you said, oh, I don't have much time to do the stuff that you really want to do. Can you tell us a little something maybe about a project you want to do, or a painting even, or?
Ooh, just well, this new website, the possibility of doing paintings that I want to do and doing prints of them were a possibility that I hadn't really thought about that much. But to be honest, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I would like doing the model kits and so forth. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I always enjoyed building things and
Mm-hmm.
making things as much as I did painting. To be honest, I think if I could go back and do anything in the world that I really wanted to do, I would love to have been involved in like building like big animated dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
animatronics and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was always a super interest of mine. But back when I was growing up, I mean, nowadays most colleges have courses and advanced courses in like even like special effects and mechanical effects and so forth. But that was just any information that you got back then was literally through famous monsters of filmland and some of the
Right.
old magazines and so forth, and a lot of that stuff that
Right.
that was not very accurate
Were you
back
building
then.
were you building stuff as a kid then, besides, say, because I know that you mentioned the model kits, but were you trying to build stuff like on your own, or were you exclusively kind of like just working with the model kits when you were younger?
Oh well, when I look back on it, I always had something that I was working on. I just something I was thinking about the other day. I was at one point I saw in the toy catalogs there was a you could get a model kit of like a beating heart, and I
Mm-hmm.
was always in anatomy and science and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I decided to I got some popsicle sticks and Elmer's glue and built a little skeletal structure of a heart. And I at the time I had no idea what the interior of a heart looked like, but
Right.
like a heart shaped kind of thing, and I covered it with got this thick saran wrap and covered it. Like this took days. I
Yeah,
worked on it for days. I got some rubber hose from a toy fire truck for arteries and stuff. And then I
that's pretty cool.
managed to get my mom to let me mix up some water and food coloring for blood, and then just like I poured it all in there and just like straight through it, and destroyed it. But it was, I don't know what I expected from it, but it was fun to do, and I just always had little projects like that going.
Had you ever tried any sculpting at all? I don't know if if that's a natural progression between like painting and maybe constructing, but anything like that, sculpting or.
I do. I have sculpted. I've never really had a reason to.
Mhm.
Uh, I I have a model of a giant, about a foot tall giant wielding an axe. I posted it on my website.
Oh, cool.
But that was the first thing I'd done in years and years,
Hmm.
and I entered it in the Chicago military miniature contest. You got a silver medal, so
That's
that
awesome.
was not too bad. But I enjoy doing that sort of thing. I mean, just a few years back, I had some ties with the local Renaissance fair.
Hmm.
A friend of mine, Robin Rabb, uh, got a job through them to build. They wanted to build a throne room, with the various themed thrones. So we got together and we built these like a dragon throne and
Hmm.
a steampunk throne and
Cool.
this, we did like 8 or 10 different themed thrones, that they displayed out at the fair, and that was a lot of fun. We didn't get paid a lot, but it was just the experience.
Yeah.
It was worth it.
Yeah, the joy of it, the interest. So you mentioned Renaissance fair. Do you get dressed up and go to the fairs and sort of like get out there and experience it?
At one point, I actually had a building out there and sold prints, but that was
Cool.
well, my friend Robin. She is an incredible sculptor. She did her own sculpted and cast concrete items, and also was doing face painting. And she kind of convinced me to come out there, and but she didn't have to convince me too much. It was fun to do.
Mm.
But yeah, I still have my little costume, with the leather thingamabobs, whatever they are. But it was fun to do. I don't know if I'd want to do it now, but it was, 8 or 10 years ago. It was fun.
Yeah. Is there is th- when I'm kind of like picturing I'm trying to picture like of course to someone like myself who pictures your worlds and kind of being D&D and representing D&D. When you think back to those paintings and those creations do you have an idea of what that entire world looks like, or was it just sort of limited to whatever paintings you were working on at that time?
Well, certainly for TSR, I mean, each painting was for a specific, either like Dragonlance
Mhm.
or D&D, or uh, they were kind of in their own little world there. So had to kind of adapt and be aware of, what would be best for that particular scenario. So they were a little bit hemmed in that respect
Mhm.
for the D&D stuff.
Right. So then, I know we sort of talked a little bit about this, and I actually find this to be a really interesting thing, and I wanted to ask you about it. So I'd asked you about role playing, and you had mentioned that there was kind of a limited time when you were playing RPGs at TSR. But and I think before that you had sort of known what D&D was, but you hadn't really played it before. What was it like sort of playing RPGs for the first time and playing again with all of these people that were basically at the top of their game and during the golden years of RPGing? Um, how did you feel like with the experience of that? And um, What were your experiences is having done that at TSR?
Well, when I first got there, I mean, I think it's probably true of most of the artists that started there. And this was, like I say, in the early '80s, so D&D was really just kind of catching on.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us had not had any experience with
Hmm.
role playing. Certainly, I had not. Larry had not. Clyde had not. And when Keith Parkinson came in, he actually had been playing the game, and he had at one point. Well, we started playing a game at lunchtime, uh, which Jim Rosloff, who was the art director at the time,
Mm-hmm.
started running for us. He was a dyed-in-the-wool gamer.
Yeah.
So we started running a game at lunchtime just so we all kind of get a kind of an idea of the thrust of the game.
Hmm.
So we played for about a year, and I always like to tell a story about how I was a magic user with a pseudo dragon familiar, and well, at one point, at this point, Keith Parkinson had taken over as dungeon master, and I think I just got to sixth level and just got my fireball spell. And I was just itching to throw that
Right.
fireball. So I made the mistake of throwing it in a confined space, and Keith asked me over and over, "Are you sure you want to do this? Did you
Classic
read the
mistake.
description of the spell?" Yeah, okay, yeah, it looks good to me. I did a little middle math for the area, I guess, which must have been wrong. So anyway, I threw my fireball and incinerated everybody, and I was I was I could not be resurrected. I was I got an elven magic user or something like that. So the game kind of took a different direction after that. I think we all had to roll up different characters, and we kind of continued on for a while after that. But that kind of took a little bit of the steam out of the
Right.
scenario.
A little wind out of your sails with that. So, did you, as you're playing the game, did you find any sort of inspiration for your artwork from it, or was it always kind of? Because I've talked to some creators who say their gaming is separate than like what they're creating, and um, or vice versa. Did you bring any of the ideas from your painting into the game itself, or um, did you find yourself like with imagery conjured up that would later make its way into your paintings at all?
I don't know. I can't think of anything really specific, but certainly just having an understanding of the game. It's a great game, and it's
Mm.
there's no bounds, and you're only bound by your imagination. So it was a lot of fun, but it does take up a lot of time, and when you're as does you know doing artwork, and when you have
Yeah.
wife and kids and so forth,
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to make the choice. So I have not subsequently done a lot of gaming after having left TSR, but it was some. There's not a lot of people that I knew at TSR have moved away, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, sometimes it occurs to me, I could maybe give that another go.
Yeah. Are you, so you're interested in playing some games again, huh?
Possibly, it was fun. It was certainly a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, let me ask you maybe for a final question here. I heard you kind of mention, I read in an interview, um, and I might be misremembering the exact wording on this, but you said something that sometimes the most popular uh, pieces of your work are not necessarily the ones that you like the most. And I was just wondering, is there a work, maybe a character design or an illustration somewhere, something that you're particularly just super happy with, and super or proud of, and that you can kind of think of, and it doesn't even have to be a D&D thing. I mean, anything in particular, perhaps like going back through your life. Is there something that stands out to you?
We have a handful of probably favorite D&D, TSR art, the big red dragon on the beginner's box set, and the Magister, which is the necromancer, conjuring up the skeletons and so forth. As I mentioned, I love to do the monsters and
Yeah.
the skeleton, that sort of thing. So those are the ones that kind of resonate with me, and uh, uh, probably the things that I would tend to put more into and be more fully realized, I guess. But it really just kind of depends on the subject and so forth. I've had more more regular paintings, I guess, that as long as they come out well. I mean, you always see things different in hindsight. I mean, it's 2 days after finishing a painting, you can go back and say, "Oh, well, I wish I'd
Yeah.
done this." But so it depends on. I'm perfectly able to blow any subject matter.
Okay. Well, I would say that if I were, honestly, I cannot think of any of your paintings that I wouldn't want to. I mean, I think they're all wonderful, and I've really enjoyed our talk tonight. It's quite something for me to actually get to talk to you after so many years of like admiring your stuff, and I appreciate your time and the fact that you would speak with us. So thank you for that, and I just wanted to say to everybody watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you like what you see, please think about liking and subscribing. It helps me out and helps me find great people like Jeff to talk to in the future. And to those of you that had to sit through the first 5 minutes or so of the fiddling with the technology, I do apologize, and sorry about that. But I think it was well worth it because we got a great discussion with Jeff. So Jeff, thank you so much, and the best of luck to you in all of your future endeavors.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we were able to finally get connected and not injure anyone.
That's I think that's how we'll leave it. Let's just leave it. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next time on the show.
Thanks very much.